Hi, I'm Jeanette Smith with Vinesmith Vineyard Services. I put together this project with the Virginia Vineyards Association in response to members who said they wanted to know how much time other growers spend on canopy management practices. We had three objectives. They were to first find the average time it takes to do canopy management tasks manually versus mechanically. And then using those averages, compare the cost of doing certain practices mechanically versus manually. And then finally, to compare the average time it takes to manage vines using head training, that is, cane pruning, versus cordon training, otherwise known as spur pruning. So I sought the help of five experienced growers who have been tracking times in their vineyards with acreage that ranges from 12 acres to 200 acres. Those panelists are Ori Holtzlag, Tom Kelly, Kiernan Slater, Carl Tinder, and Hunter Emsch. I made this spreadsheet listing vineyard practices throughout the year, and then each panelist generously filled in the number of labor hours or machine hours per acre that he or she has recorded for each task. We didn't include tasks that are usually done with a tractor, such as canopy spraying, herbicide spraying, or mowing. We're only looking at tasks that are traditionally done manually and comparing the costs of doing each task manually versus mechanically. And since we wanted to be able to compare time required to manage head trained versus cordon trained vines, we show data for pruning and shoot thinning, head trained vines in red font, and data for cordon trained vines in purple font. Now let's look at the columns. For each task, these columns show the hours per acre that each of the five panelists recorded to do the task either manually or mechanically. And then using those hours, we are able to calculate the cost of doing each task manually in this section and calculate the cost of doing each task mechanically in this section. Once we got into this project, we realized that our average times on some tasks are really not very meaningful, either because our sample size was too small, because we only had five growers, and I regret that we only had one grower that uses head training, or because some of the growers are doing multiple tasks at the same time, and we really can't tease out how much time it takes them to do just one of those tasks. Okay, so was this project all for naught? Well, we don't think so. And here's why. If we can make this an ongoing project, we can get data from more growers and make the average times more meaningful. And also, this project has illustrated that there are many different ways of doing a task, and you really need to do what works for your own operation. And then finally, even though some of our averages are not very strong, we've created a worksheet where you can plug in your own time data and determine the economic feasibility of buying a machine for your operation. We have posted a version of this worksheet that you can download on the VVA website. In the downloadable version, we've removed the data for our panelists, but we've kept the averages. And there are cells and columns shaded in green where you can put in your own data, and that data will override the average data. Now let's go over how the worksheet works. For each task, in this example, we're looking at disposing of prunings. If a panelist did that task manually, he or she logged in man-hours per acre in the white cells. And if a panelist did that task mechanically, he or she logged in machine hours per acre in the beige cells. And we've also adjusted the man-hours presented here to reflect a vineyard that's trained to VSP with 9-foot row spacing, because you can expect a vineyard with divided canopy or closer row spacing to require more man hours per acre to complete a task. Or conversely, you can expect a vineyard with wider row spacing to require fewer man hours per acre. Then the average number of labor hours per acre for the panelists is shown in this column, and the average number of machine hours per acre for the panelists is shown in that column. So here's what your downloadable worksheet looks like. The panelist data is gone, but the average labor and machine hours are still there. And now let's look at how we came up with the costs. So to determine the cost per acre of doing a task manually, that average number of man hours is multiplied by an hourly labor rate. And I've plugged in $15 here, but because it's a green cell, you can plug in your own number in the downloadable worksheet. And then based on that calculation, you get your average cost per acre to do the task manually here. If you have your own data for manual labor hours per acre, you can plug that in here. And the formula in this cell will now multiply the labor rate by your number of hours rather than the average number of hours. Figuring the cost per acre of a machine is a little more complicated. So for this, you need to add up the cost of the operator's time plus depreciation of the machine plus maintenance of the machine. And if you finance this implement, you'll also need to include debt service. But to simplify this process, I'm not going to include that cost. But also remember, since most of these implements require a tractor, you're also going to need to add in the cost of operating that tractor. So in our spreadsheet that's downloadable, we've provided data for the tractor here, okay? So now back to our machine costs. Here's our tractor. In addition to the cost of the implement, the tractor costs are going to include depreciation and fuel and maintenance. So we're going to go over these costs one by one. But as you know, the cost per acre of owning and operating a machine is acreage dependent, right? So you can plug in the number of acres that you have right there. Okay, so first let's look at the cost of the equipment operator. So here's our panelists' average hours per acre on a machine to do this particular task, which is disposing of prunings. And this, by the way, is using a flail mower. And we've plugged in a wage of $20 per hour for an equipment operator. So here's the cost per acre for that operator to do that task. And then that $11 will be added with the other costs to go into our total cost per acre for operating that equipment. Now, if you have your own data for hours per acre to run a machine, you can plug that in here, plug in your equipment operator hourly wage here, and the formula will select your data over the average data, and then that will be added into the total. Now let's look at the depreciation of the implement. So here's the cost of a new Rinieri flail mower from Winchester Equipment. You can plug in your own number if you have something different. And in this example, we're going to assume we're going to replace the machine in 10 years. And you can plug in whatever number of years you want here. To make it simple, we are going to use straight line depreciation with no salvage value. So here's the depreciation of this machine per year. And then to get our depreciation per acre, our worksheet will divide our annual depreciation by our acres, and that number will be added to our total. This is the average maintenance cost per working hour for this machine. I've gotten this number from a Cornell publication, and I've plugged this number in, but because it's in a green cell, you can plug in your own number if you have something that you would prefer using. This number, the maintenance cost per hour, is then multiplied by the number of hours per acre, and it's added to our total. Now let's look at the tractor fuel and maintenance. I'm assuming here that we've got a new 70 horsepower narrow tractor with a cab from Winchester Equipment. You can plug in whatever you want here. But with this tractor, I expect fuel and maintenance to cost $18 per hour of operation, which is also a number from Cornell. You can plug your own number here if you have something different. And then this goes into the hourly cost of our tractor. Now let's look at tractor depreciation. So here's the cost of our new tractor. You can plug in your own number. In this example, we're going to assume that we're going to be replacing this tractor in 15 years. Again, put in your own number if you wish. And again, using straight line depreciation with no salvage value, here's the depreciation of this tractor per year. But what we really want to know is the depreciation of the tractor per hour of operation. So, if this tractor is currently being used for spraying canopy, herbicide, and mowing only in the vineyard, I'm estimating that we're going to be using it for about 25 hours per acre per year. You can plug in your own estimate in this column if you wish, if you don't feel like 25 is a good number for your operation. But for the point of demonstrating how this equation works, we're going to go ahead and assume 25 hours per acre per year. Now remember, we've got a 10-acre vineyard, so that means I'm putting 250 hours a year on this tractor to do spraying, mowing, and herbiciding. So now I'm going to divide my annual depreciation of the tractor by my 250 hours per year to get my cost of depreciation per hour of use, which will then be plugged into the total cost of my tractor per hour. And in this case, we're looking at about $33. And finally, we're going to multiply the hourly cost of our tractor by the hours per acre to operate the implement and add that to all of the other costs to get our cost per acre for operating this machine in the vineyard. So in this example with 10 acres, using the averages from our panel, it's going to cost us $47 per acre to dispose of the prunings by hand versus $94 per acre to dispose of the prunings with a flail mower. However, I must reiterate my disclaimer. These are not strong averages because of the size of our panel and because of multitasking. And so you really need to keep your own records and plug in your own data into the worksheet. But I think you'll find that this worksheet is going to be a pretty handy tool for you to ascertain at what point in the expansion of your vineyard you can justify buying specialized pieces of machinery. The one other thing that I would like to point out here is that in the process of doing this project, we did recognize that some varieties are going to require more management than others. This data represents a mixture of varieties. So I just want to say thanks again to Ori Holtzlag, Tom Kelly, Kiernan Slater, Carl Tender, and Hunter Imsch for being on our panel and giving us our data. And also, I want to thank Tim Gano from Winchester Equipment for giving me quotes on various pieces of machinery. And then finally, I'd like to say thank you to Don Vaught Stein at Duquesne Winery for giving me information on the desuckering machine. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at Jeanette@vinesmith.com. Thanks.